I always imagined being a superstar at every league of hockey that I played. Yes, I know that sounds funny, but I know that a ton of hockey players can relate to this. I always envisioned myself scoring a ton of goals, setting up a ton of plays, having tons of points, and just being like a superstar on every single team. And it seemed like eventually I was going to get to play that level and play that style, and then just be able to play that style for the rest of my career. I wrote it on my walls. I saved it as the background on my phone. I shouted affirmations in the mirror. I'm a goal scorer. I'm a superstar. I'm the best. I'm the best player on this team. I'm the best player in this league. And in my mind, I knew that eventually I'd have a breakout year. It was going to happen. I was going to get there. And then I just start putting up numbers and just start being the type of player I always dreamed of being. So in minor hockey, I dealt with a lot of politics. And I know most players in minor hockey do deal with a lot of politics. So naturally, I kept my confidence up during my minor years and believed that eventually, once I got into junior, I'd make it happen. Then through junior, I said, well, okay, maybe I haven't had a huge breakout year, but in college, it'll happen. And I think I would have kept doing that for the rest of my career, but something really changed when I stepped into college. And unfortunately, I got sidelined by some injuries and some different things. But my performance when I first stepped into that league, and what I've seen with the players that I've worked with, is that when you figure this tool and this skill out, everything changes. And mind you, for about 12 to 15 years, I spent every offseason thinking, man, I'm in the right headspace. This is going to be my year. And then just nothing would really click the way I thought it was going to. And in these off seasons, I'm talking about I was doing like all the work that you could think of. Like I was doing the skills work, I was doing workouts, I was doing like learning how to meditate and learning how to visualize. And well, as you might have guessed, I didn't become the player I wanted to be on every team. I didn't become that offensive player, that superstar, sniper, goal scorer, the guy who puts up points. That wasn't who I became every single year. Now, mind you, I did get to be a top offensive guy on some teams, but not every single team. So instead of being one style of player like I kind of envisioned and just being that player for the rest of my career, instead I actually had to learn to adapt and change my game because I had to be a different player on different teams. Really, I had different roles on different teams. And a role is the core responsibilities or actions your team or your coach expects of you every single game. And this can be assigned to you again from your coach, from teammates, from higher up management, but it's something that people are assigning you. And for my high level pro guys watching this, you know what that's like. You know when you get assigned a role. And as you get up in higher levels, you have to understand how to actually adapt and change that. That's the real key here. Now, I've talked about this concept before, but everybody is not McDavid. You're not McDavid, and that's okay. What I mean is that some outlier players are going to be able to play the same style for their whole career because they're always the best and they're always so far ahead of everybody. And again, for example, like McDavid, Austin Matthews, these are kind of a few guys who, from the second they stepped into the NHL and pretty much their whole younger careers, from what I can presume based on their elite prospects and what I've heard and what I know, it seems like they got to be the same player throughout their whole careers. Of course, they do evolve, but they maintain a similar style. And of course, everybody has to change and adapt their game when they do get to the NHL. But these guys just didn't have to do it as much. But for the rest of us, even guys like Nate McKinnon, when they stepped up into the NHL, for example, and everybody has a different league as they move up leagues, that they eventually reach a point where they have to actually make an adaptation. But once you get to a certain point, and for McKinnon it was the NHL, you start to bump up against, I can't play exactly the same way. And when I do play that way, I don't have as much success. I can't just do anything I want at any time. And you can argue McDavid or McKinnon is the best player in the world right now, arguably. And when you look at him, you can really say, man, like it was clear that he hadn't really figured out his game. He wasn't able to play his exact style and be dominant until he started to have a breakout season. And that breakout season happened in 2017. So he went from having 53 points in the previous year to 97 in the next year. And he attributes a lot of his success in this time to actually working with a mental coach and actually developing his mental game. Because when he started to figure out how to deal with having a hot head and getting emotional, he learned how to stay positive, how to handle challenging situations, and how to be a better leader. It made a big difference in how he was able to actually step in and play his style fully and really become the type of player he now is able to be. And of course, he's been able to find his way back to that style he played as he was younger, but it's so important to realize that players have to learn to adapt and adjust. Are you starting to see a theme? So even if you're labeled like the next one, like McKinnon was, you're not guaranteed to get to play the same style all the time. And 99.999999% of players, they don't get to just stay the same style. They have to learn to adapt. Look at Alex Lafreniere, for example, or Lafreniere, however you say it. When he stepped into the NHL, he was expected to potentially be like a Crosby or like a McKinnon or a McDavid. That's what they were kind of thinking. He could be that all-star player. But when he stepped into the league, it was very clear that he wasn't ready to be an elite guy yet, and he struggled. He had to really manage being able to bounce around. He had to play some time in the A, and it wasn't just an automatic step in and getting to play his game. He had to learn to play a new style and adapt his game. Again, are you starting to see the pattern? Go look back at all of the last number one picks. They all didn't get to just jump into the league and be the best player. They had to change. They had to learn how to play like third line or second line. They had to learn how to maybe not be as much of an offensive player, but a lot of times just learning how to play on the other side of the puck as well. Now, I'm sure you don't fall into that like 0.00001%, so you probably have to learn to also adapt your game. It's probably time to think about, how am I going to learn how to step into higher leagues and change my role effectively and be able to change my role at many times throughout a season, because that's what's going to happen. And that is why in all of the programs that I teach players in, I really focus on making sure they understand how to adapt their game and how to be versatile, because versatility is everything when you move up levels. If you're trying to maximize your game, you want to think about your game from the perspective of, I have one core style that I play my best, but I also am able to adapt my game and be versatile within a bunch of different styles. And this doesn't mean you just lock yourself into saying, okay, I'm just going to be an offensive player for the rest of my career and that's all that matters, kind of like what I had in my head. Or I'm not just going to be a defensive player and that's just the way it is. I can never step into an offensive role. It's imperative that you understand how to prepare to play different roles and how to understand what's lacking in your game, what's not complete. Once you understand that, then you can actually make adjustments and you can actually change things. So again, this off season is the time where you have to learn to become versatile. This is the time to do it. So a great example of this is moving to a new team. So when you move to a new team, if you're moving up levels, if you're moving to a new team within the same level, whatever it is, even if you're moving down levels, you're going to have to learn to change typically your offensive preferences and then your risk preferences. So you're going to need to shift to being more either offensive or defensive and high risk or low risk. And what I like to say is these are preferences because they're types of plays you prefer to make. And you can start to pick what you prefer to make in certain situations, and you have more of a tendency to do something rather than do something else. So when you move up levels, typically what you're going to need to do is learn how to play a more safe and a more defensive oriented game and have more safe and defensive preferences. That's what you need your preferences to be. If you're moving to a team where you're going to suddenly have more opportunities to play offensive, then you need to actually take the time to prepare your offensive and higher risk tendencies. And then there's some times where you may have to be more balanced with one or the other or both. And that's how you're going to actually succeed when you shift teams and shift leagues. And this is not like groundbreaking in the sense of nobody's ever talked about being versatile and shifting these things. But what I do think this is doing is I'm actually giving you a framework where you can start to rethink the way that you program your mental software to actually have different preferences for different situations. And the key is just learning how to shift and kind of pick which preferences you're going to have in this game. And that's something we'll talk about later. We'll get into the details and the action steps. And so let's back up a little bit to my career. So I remember for a very long time in my career, I used to get really angry anytime my coach asked me to change roles. Because for me, I felt like when a coach said to change roles, it was kind of like an insult to me. Like, okay, I was being offensive and now you're telling me, oh, I got to play defensive. Or maybe I'm being defensive and he says, well, I need you to change your game a little bit. I need you to play a little more risky. I'd always think like, man, I'm preparing this way. I'm doing what you said to do. And now you're telling me to change. But now looking back, I now know that that was really silly of me to get angry about that. because I was actually learning how to be more versatile. And versatility was going to help me. It would have helped me a ton, especially when you go into college, when you start going into pro. You have to be more versatile. And if you listen to any high-level professional player, I've talked to tons of different high-level players to really confirm this because I didn't play pro myself. Everybody will say the same thing. You have to learn how to change your game. You have to learn how to adapt. And the problem is most people are not taught how to actually do this. You're kind of expected to just figure it out. And if you're like 18, 19, 20, your early 20s, you're a young player trying to figure out how to be an adult in a league where everybody else is older and they're more mature, and you have to figure out, well, I either succeed or I don't have a job. And then you got to start thinking about, well, what else am I going to do? Right? And so that's why it's so important to learn. You got to change your game. You got to adapt and switch up your style. So instead of getting angry, especially for my young guys, instead of getting angry, you want to actually be excited because you're adapting your game and you're learning a new skill of being versatile. So take pride in that. Take pride in being somebody who can play different styles and who can be successful in different roles. And the more prideful you can be and the more positive you can be about that, the more success you're going to have in the long run, I promise you. And so again, talking about really what I learned from having hundreds of different conversations with players in pretty much every junior league in North America, players in Europe, players in professional leagues across the whole world, coaches, scouts in different leagues, in different professional leagues, college leagues, junior leagues, minor hockey. When I had these conversations, what I started to realize was one core thing. Once a player has the skill set to compete in a league, at least 80% of their success is going to be the mental software that they have installed in their mind and how you're able to apply your unique game to the role that you're being given on your team. So really what I mean by this is that 80% of the game really comes down to how do you actually deal with the challenges mentally. So like, what are the emotions you have come up and do they help you? What are the thought patterns? What are the beliefs you have? How do you prepare yourself both mentally, physically, and skill-wise? What are those things that are going to separate you? Because at the end of the day, when you move up to especially college level, then especially past college into pro, and you start getting into like AHL, NHL, the skill level is so close. Everybody is so similar. And what makes such a big difference is it's the mentality, it's the consistent preparation, but that comes from the mental software that you install. So you can prepare your mental software beforehand and get that stuff ready so that when you do get into these new situations, you have the software to handle the situation. But the mistake that I see most people make, and the reason that why most players don't actually do mental prep work in the off season, is because they think they can learn it when they get there. But don't wait until you get there. Don't wait until you get to the league to be preparing for the league. Don't wait for the fight to start preparing for the fight. Don't wait for the actual start of the war to prepare for the war. You want to be preparing and actually training. This is why countries in the world prepare their military so that if something does happen, they're ready, they're prepared for it. And hockey players will come to me and say, well, it's 2-3 months out from the season, and I don't know if I should really start now. Maybe I should wait till closer. This is the time to start. This is the time to start working on your mental game. Prepare beforehand. Prepare before you get to the fight so that you're ready for the fight and then you can succeed in that fight. You don't want to wait till the season to see if you have the mental software ready and then start trying to install stuff really quickly, because then you're just trying to cram in a bunch of training last minute. And we all know what happens when we do that. When you do that for a school test, for example. Yeah, you can do fine, but you're not going to be exceptional using that strategy. So don't use that fucking strategy. Please, for your own sake, right? And so the biggest thing going into this season and really in your off-season preparation is thinking about this core quote from Darryl Belfry. And he says, know your role, but stretch your label. And what this really means is you need to know what your job is on your team. So anytime you're playing in a game and this upcoming season, when your coach says, I need you to play this role, you need to be so clear on what that role is. But you need to stretch your label, which means that your coach trusts you to play other roles. So when you're asked to be a defensive defenseman, Also prepare how to be a good pass first defenseman and somebody who can step in and play a little bit more two-way. Not because you have to do that right now, but so that when you do have an opportunity to, you've prepared the software and the skill software and the psychological software, right? So the abilities and then the actual like belief in yourself and the decision making and the IQ to align with who you're going to be in that situation. How do you think it's going to work out if you get into a situation next season where you're not prepared for something and then you suddenly get thrown into the mix and your coach says, do this thing you haven't prepared for, and then what do you think what's going to happen? You're not going to be ready for it. So prepare for the next situations. If you're currently playing in AAA right now and you're about to go into junior, start preparing to be in different situations in junior. Have conversations with people. Actually figure out what it's going to be like generally and prepare yourself. Same thing when it comes to junior to college. Don't just show up and hope you're ready for it. Prepare beforehand. Same with college to pro. Don't just wait. Don't just hope you're going to kind of figure it out and adapt on the fly. Just like, well, I'll just show up to the test last minute and I'll study a few pages. Study the textbook beforehand so that when you come into it, you're so prepared that there's zero stress. People ask me, Corson, why am I not confident? Well, did you fucking prepare with complete confidence? No, you didn't. You didn't prepare fully. You can't be fully confident if you didn't prepare fully. That's probably the most simple way to think about it. And so that's what I mean. And preparation doesn't just mean skill work. I see a lot of mental coaches start to get into this habit of like, they're like, oh, just do the reps, do the reps, do the reps. But it's not just about doing random reps. It's about doing the right work in terms of your mental, your skills, and then your physical training to build the hardware. So I hope that makes sense so far. So let's dig into a couple specifics. So the first thing I want to dig into is talking about what does it actually mean to change your role? So changing your role basically means a few core things or several core things. So this can mean playing a different position, playing on a different line, playing different minutes, and this can mean playing more minutes or less minutes, being expected to be more offensive or more defensive, being higher risk or lower risk, and then you can get into a lot more detail. It definitely can just get more and more complex from there. And really, when it comes down to changing your role, the key is changing your mental software. So when I say mental software, I mean changing the decision-making patterns that you make and basically changing the neural links in your mind. So if this happens, then I do this. And you want to change that in terms of how you emotionally respond to situations, how you physically respond to situations, what are the thought patterns you have around it, and really who are you? Who do you show up as in that situation? And prepare yourself for all of the different situations. So when you're asked to play a different role, you have to change your software to align with that role. And most players try to do this by, again, just like last minute, all right, let's just see what happens. But if you learn what it means to play that role and what are the different preferences involved, then you can actually set yourself up to be able to make that transition very quickly. And the key to this is not being attached to a role. So do not get caught up, like I talked about earlier, in just thinking, well, I'm just going to be defensive or it's just going to be offensive or whatever it is. You have to learn how to adapt and change. That's what's going to make the difference for you. Now, just to clarify, the reason why it's so hard to change your software through physical practice alone is because confidence really comes down to our ability to actually have a memory bank, essentially, of what we can do. You need to have basically a memory bank in your mind of like, this is what it looks like. And there needs to be a clear vision of like, this is how I do that thing. So you can do this through having past memories that you actually physically did, or you can create memories that actually are essentially a vision that your brain believes has happened. And this is going to drive you forward to do the things you want to do. Because what that's doing is it's changing your mental software to align with the experiences that you believe that you had. And it's very hard to rely on just physical practice because let's say you get into a practice and your coach is watching you really closely, which most teams, coaches don't want you to mess up drills, or at least not mess up that often. And so let's say you want to practice, let's say, trying to get the puck to the fourth man high on a zone entry. So you're entering in the zone and you're a forward, and then you're trying to kind of do a quick whip across pass and hit the guy, the defenseman, as the fourth guy coming in and trailing. Well, This might be a pass that your coach hasn't said, hey, you got to do this, or maybe he did. But regardless, it's hard because you may want to maybe do, let's say, like a backhand pass there. But if you try that, you got to maybe try it like 20, 30 times to really get it down. But your coach is not going to let you screw that up like 15 out of the 30 times in order to get it down. And so if you do, your coach is basically just going to say, oh, well, he can't do that very well, and so let's put someone else in that position. So instead of having that happen, my recommendation is you prepare yourself beforehand. You see what I mean? So you prepare yourself before you get in the situation. You actually do the mental work beforehand to program your mind to do the things you want to do, get more comfortable, and set up your mental software to make that decision. So then when you get in that situation, you're so much more comfortable. You increase the likelihood that you execute it by, let's just say, like 20, 30, 40, could be 50, could be even more than that percent. Again, this is where I want to start to get into more studies around this and actually set up studies in the future for this. But the more we can get you to make the plays you want to make in those situations, then you build that trust and build more of a confidence memory bank. And it gives you that feedback of, oh, okay, I can do this. So again, this is how you get confident. This is how you build your game. And so really what mental practice allows you to do is to program your neural links or your mental software. If this happens, then this. You are able to do this and do it the way you want it to, right? Or the way you want to. Because when we practice physically, we oftentimes will make a ton of mistakes. Mistakes are good for learning, but if you can shortcut that process by making the mental mistakes of not being able to see the play clearly, getting to a point where you can see it clearly in your mind and feeling the play completely, wiring it with strong emotions, then when you get into that situation, boom, you just feel so comfortable like you've been there 100 times. That's because you basically have, because your brain doesn't really know the difference between a true experience and a mental experience if you create a strong enough mental experience. And they've shown this in endless studies that when people visualize a movement that they know how to do generally, or pretty well, the better you know how to do it, the better it works, parts of your brain that fire when you do it physically will fire when you do it mentally. So the more you fire it in your mind, the stronger that myelination is going to occur. If you don't know what myelination is, go back and watch the last couple videos or podcasts, and we'll dig more into that. You'll see how myelination works to wire your mental software. And so here is why I think you should be a mental programmer. Here's why I think you should work on mental programming. Here is my theory for how it works. And in the next episode, so that this doesn't turn into like a full hour-long episode, we'll dig into how to exactly do this. But I wanted to really get you in the space of understanding to do the mental work, to actually do the preparation, and what that really means in a general sense. And then in the next session, again, we'll dig right into the details of how to go more in depth with this. But really, my theory on mental programming and why you should be a mental programmer is because if you can prepare your mental software before you get into the situation, you will be more prepared than someone who didn't. So I don't think that mental work and mental programming is a replacement for physical work, but I think it is an extremely valuable supplement. It's kind of like taking like a steroid for your mind or your performance. And if you're looking for an edge and want to get ahead of the people around you, this is the time to do it, because in the next 5-ish years, I think everybody's going to start picking up on this. Once the studies come out, once we have more backing, it's going to just be a common practice. I think that in the NHL, within the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see pretty much every team have a detailed protocol for how to program your mind. So when a player changes roles, there's going to be like a detailed process and protocol that the team has the player go through to actually visualize and program that stuff into the brain so they can make a quicker adaptation to that role. If anybody's ever seen The Matrix, I think it's going to be a lot like plugging him into the actual simulation, downloading in the programs, and then really just allowing that person to have that new mental software. And so that's where we'll leave it for today. What I want you to do is to really consider for yourself the importance of versatility, the importance of learning how to change your role, and start to look into visualization. Do some research on your own. You can check out some of my previous stuff about it. And we're going to be having a course come out in the next month or so where we're really going to dig into how to actually visualize and also how to meditate as well, so that you can actually start to learn how to program your mind to be more focused, be more present, and be able to actually program the decisions you want to make. So think about that stuff, and I'll see you guys very soon.